Welcome to the Chronicles of a Cheating Wife channel. A new story every day. Don't forget to subscribe. There's nothing between us. I said it out loud the moment I pressed the tiny red button on my phone screen. The dictaphone icon flickered to life, recording the hushed rain pattering on the windows, the unsteady rhythm of my breath, and those 5 words that felt like a blade slicing through an already frayed connection. I needed to document everything. I needed a place to unload the chaos screaming in my mind, because, at that exact second, I couldn't trust my own thoughts. They spun so wildly I thought I'd forget the important parts, like that single scorching sentence from her questionnaire. "Why do you cheat?" And she had written with a neat loopy handwriting. "So I don't explode." Rain rattled the glass. I stood by the window, phone in my hand, eyes locked on the gray sky outside. The entire city looked drowned in that thick blanket of drizzle, as though the heavens opened up just to echo what was going on inside me. I felt numb. I was supposed to be furious. I was furious somewhere deep. But in that moment, it was as if my rage was locked behind a door I couldn't quite open. I only heard the roaring in my ears as I played her words over and over. "So I don't explode," I whispered into the phone, letting the voice recorder capture it. That's how she justified sleeping with him. Somewhere in the silence, a car honked faintly below. My reflection in the wet glass looked hollow, cheeks gaunt. I was 38, but I could swear I saw a pale stranger, older by at least a decade, staring back at me. "My name's Jonathan Miller. John. Everyone calls me John. Until a few hours ago, I was just a regular guy, an IT engineer balancing code reviews and a mortgage, blissfully ignorant of how fast the ground could crumble. Right then, though, I was a man on the verge of exploding myself. I turned my gaze away from the mirror of raindrops and slowly walked across the living room. The furniture felt foreign. The couch we'd shared for movie nights, the coffee table she insisted on placing near the window. Every piece of it was soaked with memories. I'd gone through them once, dusting, cleaning, picking them up for yard sales, or deciding to keep them. This time, they felt toxic, as though each object was steeped in lies I never suspected. She wasn't home. Not yet. I'd gotten back early from the office with the express intention of confronting her, but something inside me demanded a calmer approach. I needed proof. I wanted to hear the truth from her lips. More than that, I wanted her to admit it, so I could press stop on the phone and never question my recollection again. I inhaled slowly. My face felt hot. Lightning flickered outside, revealing for a second the reflection of me in the living room mirror, phone still in hand. My heart hammered. Then I remembered the questionnaire she'd left. Accidentally, or maybe just carelessly, on the kitchen counter a week before. Course: Relationship Psychology. Name: Anna Miller. Under "Why do you cheat?" her answer in graceful cursive: "To not explode." I must have reread it a dozen times. To not explode. As if I were some dull weight in her life, forcing her to fling herself into another man's bed just to stay sane. The day I found that piece of paper, I changed my email password. No underscore trust. Felt raw, straightforward, like a wound open to the world. I didn't tell her what I saw. I just kept it. I spent the next days trying to catch my breath, rethinking every conversation, every time she'd stared at her phone in restaurants, every time she worked late, every time she turned away in bed. And then came the day she slipped up for real. Or maybe she just gave up on hiding. I don't know. But it happened, and the images seared themselves into my mind like a brand. I'd parked on the corner near some random apartment block in the city center that evening. It was raining then, too. I'd had a weird intuition. Call it a gut feeling, or... He was grinning in a way I recognized all too well. That glint of possession I used to have when I looked at her. My Anna. My wife. His arms. The thought almost choked me. I should have slammed that door wide open, confronted them both right there. But I couldn't. Instead, I froze, quietly stepping closer, looking through the crack like some sick voyeur. My stomach twisted into a knot as I watched her tilt her head back and let him kiss her neck. She was wearing the same scarf I'd bought her in Seattle, a burgundy cashmere scarf that I'd given her on a romantic trip. And now it was clenched in his fists as he pressed her to the wall. Her laughter turned husky. I heard her inhale sharply, and I swear my entire body shuddered with rage or heartbreak, or God knows what. My face burned. She whispered something. I didn't catch the words exactly, but it was an endearment, something intimate, laced with desire. He slid a hand down her waist, hooking his thumb into the waistband of her skirt. I noticed how she arched her back to give him better access. That was the woman who used to fall asleep in my arms. That was my wife, the one whose day I tried to brighten every morning, whose future I'd planned to share. Now I was seeing the side of her that used to be for me alone. A moan rose from her lips, and a tremor of sick realization bolted down my spine. I could have burst in screaming, cursing, throwing fists, but the shock was so complete, I actually retreated. I turned away, pressing my back to the corridor wall, desperate not to make a sound. My breath rasped in my throat. Heart hammered so loud it drowned the patter of rain on the window behind me. Then I heard them shuffle deeper inside. For a second, the crack in the door widened, and I could see the silhouette of them pressed against the couch or maybe the table. My eyes teared up with a fury I'd never known, but my legs locked. I physically couldn't move forward. Instead, I spun around, forced myself to tiptoe back downstairs, step by step, my mind shrieking with the images of her parted lips, her hair in his hands, her clothes half undone. By the time I'd reached the front door of the building, my face was drenched in sweat or rain. I couldn't even tell. I stood there on the slick sidewalk, the taste of bile in my mouth. That was the moment I realized how thoroughly my trust was destroyed. I ended up walking aimlessly through the city for hours that night, letting the drizzle soak my jacket. I inhaled the stench of soggy newspapers and traffic exhaust, feeling numb. The next day, I took a half-day off and went straight to an attorney's office. I filed for divorce. I didn't throw a tantrum at home, didn't fling accusations in her face. I just started the process quietly, the same way I'd turned and walked away from that door. There was no reason to look for an explanation. The reason was in her words, plain as day, to not explode. But the judge, some middle-aged man with a look of forced compassion, mandated therapy, a last-ditch attempt at saving the marriage. He claimed it was standard procedure in some cases, especially if there were no kids and we had a relatively clean record of finances. The next thing I knew, Anna and I were scheduled for mandatory couples therapy. Ridiculous, right? But that's how I ended up sitting across from her in a pastel-colored therapy room, the scent of lavender in the air, all because the legal system wanted to ensure we gave it one more shot. I told you, between us, there's nothing. I wasn't interested in her explanations. I wasn't there to salvage a dead thing. I was there because it was a legal formality. And maybe, deep inside, I was there for something else. A chance to confront her in a space where she couldn't run away, a place where an official witness, the therapist, would see the truth. I wanted her to squirm, to feel that cold blade of her own betrayal. That might sound cruel, but if you've ever had your heart ripped out like that, you know that the part of you that still loves is overshadowed by the part that can't forgive. So, I went. And on the first session, she arrived wearing that same burgundy scarf from Seattle. The minute I saw it, my lips curved into a smile so forced, I felt the muscles in my cheeks ache. Our therapist, some cheerful woman named Dr. Howard with short curly hair, welcomed us with a bright grin. She had no idea what we carried inside. Anna sat down, shoulders hunched, avoiding my gaze. "How about we begin with what brought us here?" Dr. Howard asked. Her tone was warm, a direct contrast to the tension between Anna and me. She tried to meet my eyes, then Anna's. I said nothing. Anna cleared her throat. "We're..." She paused, fiddling with the scarf. "We've been..." going through a rough time. I wanted to understand how to fix things. I watched Dr. Howard scribble a note. John. She ventured, clearly prompting me to speak. I inhaled slowly, letting that wave of repressed rage swirl inside me. We're here, I said in a clipped tone. Because the judge told us to be. Anna's mouth flattened. She shot me a pleading look, as if to say, could we at least try to look normal? But normal wasn't in my vocabulary anymore. The memory of her pinned to that man's chest in that dingy apartment glowed hot behind my eyes, and I had no words to describe the cynicism that welled up. So I clammed up again and let her do the talking. She gave a lengthy sob story about how I'd become distant, how she felt alone, how she lost herself. She never directly mentioned the affair, not at first. She tiptoed around it, calling it mistakes, bad judgment, moments of confusion. Meanwhile, I stared at her. My mind drew up an image of that parted lips moment, the half-undone shirt, the flush in her cheeks when she was moaning for him. Moments of confusion, indeed. Therapy was once a week. Each time, Anna danced around the truth. And each time, I'd wait until she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I'd let out a tiny smile or a half-compliment. Then I'd sink my words into her like a small, precise blade. You used to call me boring, remember? I'd say lightly during the second session, as Dr. Howard sat between us in confusion. Apparently, you found excitement somewhere else. Anna's face went pale. She fumbled for a response, eventually mumbling. I said a lot of hurtful things when we argued. That doesn't justify. I agree. I cut in. It doesn't. Another time, on the third session, she tried telling Dr. Howard about the nights we had dinner, but barely spoke because I was stuck on my phone, reading code or answering emails. Sounds like you two lacked connection during that time, Dr. Howard said. I nodded slowly. Interesting, I said. Yet I recall you being glued to your phone in that little Italian place downtown. If memory serves, it was your face I saw illuminated by a phone screen. I guess you were texting someone more stimulating. She stammered, cheeks burning. I was checking messages from work. Sure, I said under my breath. Work. Every jab I delivered was calm, almost gentle, but I saw it land like a hammer blow behind her eyes. She'd look at me with a mix of shame and anger, sometimes opening her mouth to retort, then closing it, as though the words crumpled. Dr. Howard would attempt to steer us toward healthy communication, but it was useless. There was no healthy communication left. I was out for blood, in that quiet, methodical way that only a deeply wounded person can manage. Toward the fourth session, I remembered her forgetting my birthday. One day that I'd spent alone, waiting for her to come home, my phone silent. She turned up past midnight with some flimsy excuse. I'd never pressed her for details. I just swallowed it. So in therapy, as soon as Dr. Howard asked about times you felt unappreciated, I pounced on that memory. She never called me on my birthday. Not even a text, I said calmly. Must have slipped her mind. Or maybe she was with him. Anna's eyes brimmed with tears. John. Stop, she hissed. That's not how it was. Wasn't it? I let the rhetorical question linger. I didn't bother listening to her long-winded defense. I'd see her flail around, sometimes apologizing, sometimes lashing out, her voice tangling with fear and anger. Then Dr. Howard would remind me, "You seem very hurt," and I'd answer with a curt nod. But I never softened. My short replies hammered home a single point. I was done with the illusions. Done with her. This wasn't about saving us. It was about letting her drown in the memories of what she'd done. When I'd see that flicker of heartbreak on her face, I felt an odd satisfaction. Maybe it was petty. No, it was definitely petty. But heartbreak can turn even a mild man into something vengeful. Rain seemed to accompany each of those sessions, as if the clouds had taken up permanent residence above the city just to underscore how bleak it all was. Sometimes we'd leave the office, and I wouldn't even offer her a ride home. I'd just watch her stand there on the sidewalk, fumbling with her umbrella, tears mixing with the drizzle. I get in my car, start the engine, and drive off, leaving her behind. About halfway through these court-ordered sessions, Anna tried to talk to me privately at home. She knocked on my door. Well, the door to our bedroom. We still lived under the same roof for the time being, because neither of us had sorted out the details of who was moving out first. She came in wearing that scarf like a talisman, her eyes red from crying. "John, can we just talk?" "Not in front of the therapist," she pleaded, voice trembling. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, rummaging through old boxes. I paused, turned to look at her. "There's nothing to talk about." She let out a shaky sigh, stepping closer, hands clasped. "I know what I did is unforgivable. I thought I was losing my mind, okay. I felt invisible. And Max, I shot to my feet. Don't say his name." She fell silent, eyes glistening with tears, but it didn't move me. I was too far gone. "You think I'm going to stand here and listen to you explain how you let him do whatever he wanted to you?" I said, voice barely above a whisper yet edged with steel. "That's your story to live with, not mine. Just leave." She swallowed. "John, please, I'm so sorry. I can't. It's killing me." "It should," I murmured. Then I turned away from her and refocused on the boxes. "Close the door on your way out." When she left, I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. My chest felt tight, like I'd done a full workout without stretching. I wanted to collapse. I wanted to shriek. But I just clenched my jaw and rode that wave of bitterness until it subsided. At the 5th session, Dr. Howard pressed me harder. She asked questions about my own accountability, about my participation in the marriage's downfall. I stared at her, not sure whether to laugh or explode. Sure, I might have been an inattentive husband sometimes. Work was demanding, and I often retreated into my own thoughts. But does that justify an affair? Does it justify her lying to my face for God knows how many months? Anna tried to help me out, ironically. "It's not his fault," she said, her voice trembling. "I made those choices. I should have talked to him more instead of." I cut in with a short bark of laughter. "Talk to me more? You mean between sessions with your lover?" She fell silent again. My mind flashed to the memory of them in that apartment. Her pressed up against the wall. Her lips parted. My stomach roiled. I wanted to vomit the images out. At the last session, the 6th, a slow realization settled over me. The judge would see Dr. Howard's recommendation, and soon the divorce proceedings would continue. Possibly, we'd get the final settlement. Everything was barreling toward an end, and I was still carrying that boiling rage, still letting it shape each day. I'd wanted revenge, or something close to it, but I was also suffocating under the weight of it. That day, Anna arrived wearing the burgundy scarf once again. She sat down with a shaky composure, ankles crossed, eyes downcast. I settled into my usual chair, mind whirring. Dr. Howard smiled gently, as if trying to encourage a final push toward reconciliation. Naive, maybe, but it was her job. She folded her hands and asked quietly, "John, you've been open about your anger. But now I need to know, what do you want to happen, going forward? In your own words." The air felt thick. I glanced at Anna. She seemed braced, as if expecting me to say, "I want to try again with her," or maybe some half-baked line about second chances. But I let out a slow breath, my voice cold and certain. "I want to live. Without guilt, without trying to earn someone's approval. I just want out." Anna's cheeks flooded with color. Her lips parted slightly. Tears threatened to fill her eyes. It was the first time, after all these sessions, that I stated it so bluntly. I wanted myself back. I wanted a life not overshadowed by her betrayal or her demands, or her illusions of needing excitement. This was the moment I realized I carried the weight of her mistakes for too long. I was done. Time wouldn't heal me. It would only erase the scars if I let it. And letting it begin to erase meant dropping all attempts to salvage anything with her. "I see," Dr. Howard said softly. She turned to Anna, though she seemed reluctant to do so. "Anna, how do you feel about that?" Anna's voice shook. I was hoping there was still a chance, but I understand I messed up." I blinked at her, trying to read if there was any genuine regret in her eyes or just fear of losing stability. I saw both, I guess, but it didn't matter. My heart was locked away behind miles of devastation. She'd hammered on it too many times, and I had no energy left for her. Something had died in me the moment I saw her pinned to that man's chest. No therapy or tears would resurrect it. "Okay," Dr. Howard said gently. "I want us all to take a breath. This is a big moment." But I couldn't breathe. The tension was too thick. Anna tried to say something else, but it came out as a gasp. I just stood up. "Sorry, Doc," I murmured. "I think we're done." I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair. Dr. Howard opened her mouth to protest, but I was already heading for the door. In the hallway, I heard Anna's muffled sob. The sound made my chest tighten for a second. Then a wave of calm washed over me. This was a calm different from the numbness I'd felt before. This was the acceptance that I didn't have to carry her baggage any longer. I stepped out into the corridor, the fluorescent lights casting a harsh glare. The entire building seemed to echo with footsteps and the faint hum of conversation from other offices. Usually, after each session, I'd walk out with a sense of gloom, wanting to lash out at something. This time, I felt something else, a strange, quiet liberation. My steps were slow, but purposeful, as if for the first time in months, I was returning to my own body. Outside, the rain had led up to a light drizzle. The clouds still hung low, but there was a break of pale sunlight over the horizon, a sort of watery glow behind the gloom. It wasn't cheerful exactly, but it felt like a possibility, like an exit door from a stale, suffocating room. I walked to my car, got in, and just sat there for a moment, letting the engine idle. My phone buzzed. Messages from Anna. No doubt, or maybe the lawyer with some new detail. I ignored it. Instead, I scrolled to my voice recorder app. I'd forgotten that it was still there from that first day I said, "Between us, there's nothing." With trembling fingers, I hit play. I heard my own voice from weeks ago, raw, thick with anger. "So I don't explode." That's what she wrote. That's how she justified it. A thunderclap sounded in the background, along with my shaky breathing. Then silence. Listening to it, I felt a jolt of compassion. But not for her. For myself. For the man I was at that moment, stunned with heartbreak, barely able to function. I felt the acid of that memory burn in my throat. Time doesn't heal. I still believe that. The phrase "time heals all wounds" is a convenient lie we feed ourselves. What time really does is bury things, rub them smooth until you can no longer feel the jagged edges. Or it erases, slowly making details fade so we can live again, not because the pain is gone, but because we can't hold on to it forever. We simply run out of the strength to keep hurting. Maybe that's enough. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, exhaled, and turned the key in the ignition. The drizzle streaked across my windshield. In that moment I realized I was no longer stuck. If she needed her affair to not explode, let her keep that reason. Let her cling to it like a child with a broken doll. As for me, I wanted to stand on my own, away from her labyrinth of needs and betrayals. I wouldn't try to be what she wanted or chase the illusions of what I thought we had. I wanted freedom. And if she wanted to chase me after the dust settled, well, she could chase, but there was no place for her anymore. I'd built a new boundary, an invisible wall that marked the territory of me. The next few days were full of legal details and final statements. The judge asked me if I was certain I wanted to finalize the divorce. I said, "Yes, Your Honor," without hesitation. Anna was present, but she barely spoke. She looked at me as if she expected me to flinch, to show one last sign that I might change my mind. But my mind was set in stone. We parted ways in the hallway outside the courtroom. She reached out to touch my hand, but I pulled back. I couldn't muster the warmth to let her hold on to me, not even for closure. "I'm sorry, John," she said, voice thick with tears. I nodded, stepping away. "I know," I replied simply. Then I turned around and walked off, leaving her standing there under the buzzing fluorescent lights, hugging her arms to her chest. The taste of finality hovered in the air, as though something intangible had snapped. A chunk of my life was behind me. 8 years of marriage, countless memories, laughter that once felt so genuine. All of it collapsed under the weight of her betrayal. But inside me, I felt that calm again. The kind of calm that floods in after a violent storm, not gentle but unstoppable. My footsteps echoed as I moved down the corridor, not even glancing back. She was free to handle her regrets any way she wanted. Me, I was done playing caretaker of her shattered illusions. If I was shattered too, well, I'd figure out how to rebuild myself. On my own terms, without her or that so-called lover who'd introduced her to a new kind of thrill. I used to imagine that cheating always ended in explosive confrontations, yelling, name-calling, maybe fists. Instead, I discovered that real betrayal sometimes happens in silence. You stand there, watching a slow-motion crash, and you just walk away. The pain is so total, so big, that you can't even express it. It rots inside until you methodically hack off each memory, leaving behind stumps of what once was. Over the weeks that followed, I avoided the usual triggers. I deleted old photos of us from my phone, saved them on a flash drive if I ever needed them for legal reasons, but didn't keep them where I might see them unexpectedly. I spent free evenings coding personal projects. Mundane, sure, but it gave me structure. Some nights I'd stop coding and just stare at the empty walls of my new apartment, a decent one-bedroom near my workplace. Without her presence, everything felt both lonely and lighter. Yes, the bed was cold, the dinners were quiet, but I didn't have to question where she was or who she was with. Eventually, an envelope arrived with the final decree. The official dissolution of our marriage. I lifted the letter, read it carefully, then set it on the kitchen table. It felt like letting go of a stone I'd carried for too long. I sat down, turned on my phone, and scrolled to that old recording from the day I said, "Between us, there's nothing," but I couldn't bring myself to listen again. Instead, I pressed and held my finger on the file. The phone popped up with an option to delete, and I hesitated. Part of me wanted to keep that recording as a reminder, a testament to the darkest point of my life. But another part wanted to see if time could truly erase it, if it could help me let go by burying it, out of my immediate reach. A new wave of anger and sorrow flickered in me. Then I tapped delete. The phone asked, "Are you sure?" I clicked yes. The file vanished. I stared at the blank screen, feeling an odd chill in my chest. That was it. I could never get that exact moment back. The raw heartbreak. The reason I changed my password to no_trust. Gone in a single press of my fingertip. I let out a shaky breath and closed my eyes. Time wouldn't heal me. But maybe it would wear away the edges, let me function better, show me a future that didn't revolve around her scarf, her phone, or that man's arms. Maybe in a year, the memory of her betrayal would still hurt, but it would become a scar, not an open wound. The next day, I drove back to my old house for the last time, to pick up a couple of boxes I'd left behind, mostly books and personal stuff from the attic. Anna had moved out, too, leaving the place for sale. Stepping inside felt like entering a mausoleum. Dust motes swirled in the stale light. I found the boxes in a corner of the living room, half covered by an old blanket. I crouched down, rummaging through them. There was a framed photo on top, me and Anna from the early days, laughing on a beach, the sun painting our cheeks with happiness. I stared at the photo for a long moment, letting that golden memory flicker in my mind. Then I shoved it back into the box. I'd decide later whether to keep it or toss it. While standing there, I realized it was raining again. Soft drips on the roof, a gentle patter that seemed to breathe over the quiet house. It reminded me of that first day, pressing the record button, whispering, "Between us, there's nothing." Now, there was literally nothing between us. No legal bond, no illusions, just an empty shell of a house. I carried the boxes to my car, locked up, and got back behind the wheel. For a few seconds, I just sat there, gazing at the house. It struck me that we had once planned to raise children in there, fill it with warmth, maybe get a dog. All those plans were illusions now. It felt like I was reading an old script from a movie that got canceled halfway through production. Instead of letting the weight of that sadness crush me, I turned the key in the ignition and pulled away from the curb. I had a new place to be. The windshield wipers squeaked back and forth, clearing the drizzle. My mind wandered to the therapy sessions, remembering how meticulously I delivered each little jab at Anna. Maybe I'd done it for closure, or maybe it was petty vengeance. But each memory felt distant now, like it happened to someone else. I spent the next weeks immersing myself in everyday tasks. My job, learning new coding languages, going for short runs in the morning, cooking simple meals in my quiet kitchen. The first time I tried to fill the silence with music, I discovered that nearly every song triggered a memory of her. So I listened to podcasts about technology or sports, anything that wouldn't remind me of us. My phone lit up occasionally with calls from old friends who'd heard about the divorce. They wanted to talk. I answered politely, but I kept it short. The more I talked about the betrayal, the more I felt anchored to it. One evening, though, I found myself replaying the entire story in my head as I cleaned the dishes. A wave of raw emotion hit me so hard I had to grip the edge of the sink. My breath caught in my throat. I let out a muffled groan, pressing my forehead against the cupboard, knuckles white around the dishcloth. Time doesn't heal, I reminded myself. It only erases. Maybe I was still too close to the event for erasure to do its work. Perhaps I needed to endure a bit longer. And so, day by day, I moved forward in that half-numb, half-determined state. My new routine started to feel normal, though loneliness gnawed at me around the edges. Sometimes I'd dream of her. Sometimes it was a dream of us laughing, with no sign of betrayal. Other times, I'd see the real nightmare. That apartment, that man's hands on her, the scarf I'd bought in Seattle twisted in his fists. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. But I wouldn't cry. I'd just lie there, letting the darkness wash over me, until the alarm beeped and another day began. Eventually, the day came when I decided to remove my wedding ring from the desk drawer, where I'd stashed it after everything. I stared at the simple gold band for the last time. It used to mean something vital, a promise, a commitment. Now it felt like a hollow circle of metal. I debated pawning it, but somehow that felt cheap, so I ended up tossing it in a small box with other worthless keepsakes. Maybe I'd throw it out eventually, or maybe it would remain a silent testament to the old me. I can't say when it happened exactly, but one afternoon, I stepped out of my office building and realized the sky was brilliantly blue. The air felt fresh, the sunshine warm. I paused on the sidewalk, blinking. It was almost as if color had returned to my world. The wound was still there, but it felt quieter. I stood for a minute, letting the sunlight bathe my face, feeling a spark of something that might have been hope. That's when I understood I was healing, in the sense that the edges of the pain were being worn down. I didn't forget her betrayal. I didn't forget the swirl of emotions I'd felt as I listened to them behind that door. But I sensed I was on the path to living again. I was learning how to exist independently of her actions. I knew that if I kept going, one day I'd look back at all this as if it were a distant country I once visited. The heartbreak might never vanish, but it would transform into a scar that no longer bled. On a whim, I bought a plane ticket to Texas to visit my parents, who still lived near San Antonio. I told them I just needed a short vacation, left out most of the details about the divorce. They knew, of course, but they didn't pry. My father offered me a seat on the porch with a cold beer, and we watched the sun dip behind the old oak trees. It was the first time in months that I felt genuine peace. My mother joined us later, and we talked about nothing in particular. Local news, how the neighbor's dog had puppies, trivial things that reminded me life goes on no matter how battered we are. On my last night there, I walked the fields around our old farmhouse, the same fields where I learned to drive an old pickup when I was 16. The memories came flooding back. Simpler times, the feeling of being unstoppable. I breathed in the warm air, feeling tears prick my eyes. I let them fall, quietly. The wind rustled the tall grass. In that moment, I thought about Anna. I wondered if she felt the same sense of emptiness, or if she'd run back into Max's arms. Maybe they'd continue that twisted fling until they realized it was just lust. Or maybe they'd part ways too. It didn't matter. What mattered was I was done letting her define my life. By the time I returned to Seattle, I felt more grounded. I stepped off the plane, inhaled the crisp, rainy Pacific Northwest air, and realized that for the first time in a long time, I wanted to be here. I wanted to move forward. That didn't mean everything was sunshine and daisies. I still had nightmares some nights, still clenched my fists when I recalled how easily she tore my heart apart. But I no longer felt like a ghost drifting through my own life. A few weeks later, the final settlement came through. The division of assets, the sale of the house, all the legalities. It was a relief to sign the paperwork. I'd expected to feel a pang, but mostly I felt done. I strolled outside the building, noticing the drizzle had returned, pattering gently on the pavement. I let it wash over me for a moment, looking up at the gray sky. The old me, the John who was married and believed in unconditional trust, was gone. What remained was a man who had survived betrayal, and while it left scars, I was stronger for it. I decided to treat myself to a coffee at a small cafe I'd once visited with her. I wasn't sure if it would trigger painful nostalgia, but I found it was simply a coffee shop now, no longer tainted by her presence. I ordered a black coffee, sat by the window, and let my mind wander. Raindrops trickled down the glass, forming erratic patterns. I found them oddly soothing, a symbol that life can flow onward, even when it fractures. As I sipped, I thought about those lines from her questionnaire, the impetus for everything. Why do you cheat? To not explode. The part of me that once loved her in that all-consuming way still ached. But I accepted that she had her own reasons, twisted though they were. We were done. Time was erasing us. Finishing my coffee, I left a decent tip on the table and stepped outside. The drizzle soaked me in seconds, but I didn't mind. I popped open a small umbrella, started walking. My shoes splashed in tiny puddles, but I kept moving forward through the city streets, more determined with each step. Each droplet felt like a gentle nudge forward, a reminder that the world doesn't stop for heartbreak. You keep going, forging your own path, whether battered or unscarred. At last, I paused under the awning of a closed bookstore, letting the patter of rain create a steady background. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. No new messages from Anna. I realized she hadn't tried to contact me again after we signed the final paperwork. Maybe that was a mercy for both of us. Perhaps she understood that the final chord had been struck. There was nothing left to say. A swirl of conflicting emotions fluttered in my chest. Pity, sadness, anger, a faint echo of longing. And strangely enough, hope. I recalled Dr. Howard's question, "What do you want?" And I'd answered, "I want to live." Without guilt, without attempts to earn. That remained true. Even if loneliness crept in sometimes, it was the kind of loneliness that at least didn't feel like a betrayal. I could handle that. I shut my phone's screen off and slid it back into my pocket. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and I smiled grimly. The storm kept rolling, as it always does in Seattle. But behind that storm, somewhere, was a sky that might clear. I took a breath, let the tension dissolve from my shoulders. When I finally started walking again, a calm spread through me. The kind of calm that whispered, "You survived this." I'd lost a piece of my heart, gained a scar, discovered my own capacity for bitterness. But I wasn't the same naive man she used to rely on. I was free, in a broken sort of way. Time wouldn't heal me. Of that I was certain. But it was already erasing the details, softening the edges, letting me breathe. And sometimes, breathing is enough to get you through another day, another month, another year. Maybe that's how real healing begins. The rest, I'd figure out somewhere down the line, when the clouds finally parted, and the city's lights glowed bright again in my eyes. I felt the phone vibrate once more, but this time I didn't bother checking it. Some messages can wait. The future, on the other hand, was right in front of me. So I kept walking through the rain, letting each step carry me further from her final tears. The pitter-patter on the pavement reminded me of a slow, steady heartbeat, my own, and I realized that was all I needed to confirm I was still alive, still moving forward, no longer defined by that single question. Why do you cheat? Now, it no longer mattered. She had done it. I had survived. And between us, there was finally, truly, nothing.